So I'm Debbie Sasson. I'm the founder administrator of the Savvy Money for Women in Business Facebook group. And I'm also a business and money coach for female entrepreneurs. I help them to make more money, break through the $100,000 ceiling, and take care of their financial future. And today I have with me one of my clients, Yonina Rubinstein, and we started working together about 8 months ago.
Yeah.
And Yonina is a sexuality educator. I can't even get the words out of my mouth.
It's a tricky combination. No, it's a tricky combination also. I stumble over it a lot.
Okay. All right. And Yonina has been doing this work for nearly 10 years. She works with women and couples, right? Married couples. You also work with teens.
Yeah.
And I think you also have worked in the past with like teenagers at risk, right? With young women, right? And you teach also parents how to communicate with their children about sexuality. With your online course, you have an 8-week online course, and you are really an expert and an authority in this field. So welcome. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And I know when we started working together, you had thought about writing a book. That was like a 30-day goal. Haha.
I don't know how many days are in 8 months. I can't do the fast math, but yeah, it's.
Well, 8 times 30 is 240. So there you go.
So we're close, very close.
Right. And when we first started talking, you had actually thought about some different topics, maybe topics you could write about in 30 days rather than 8 months. So how was it that you decided to leave those? Because you could really talk about so many different aspects. You are a real authority on all of different aspects of sexuality. How did you choose this one?
So in the beginning, like you said, I was going to do a workbook for couples to kind of journal and explore their sexual beliefs and pasts together. And I had a bunch of ideas. But I had recently gotten a lot of questions and calls from women after giving birth in the postpartum period. And I also have a series of sessions, like a mini course that I ran a couple of times for women after childbirth. And I really noticed how such small bits of information made an enormous change in their whole feeling, their whole experience of their self and their sexuality after childbirth. So I was like, you know what, this is a topic which is so critical and can make such a huge difference. The postpartum period is super stressful anyway. It's full of so many, so much turmoil and change. And if we can at least take the load off of the topic of sexuality, that would be huge. So I dove right into that.
Okay. And when you talk about that postpartum period and some small changes, can you give like the listeners some of those small changes that women maybe they were surprised by what you were suggesting?
So even just understanding what postpartum is. So even just right, you have a baby and then you're postpartum, but how long does that last? So a lot of times we have this concept of like getting back to yourself, or this idea of after 6 weeks, you go to the 6-week postpartum checkup and then you're cleared for sex and like, you're fine. So you had your baby, you're done with it. But the postpartum period lasts much, much longer than that. In the research, it's even up to a year and a half, even up to 2 years for certain things. So just giving people, women and couples, that perspective that not to expect that a few weeks after you have a baby, you'll be back to like your normal pre-baby functioning in general and sexually as well. Just understanding that was a huge relief and mind shift for these women and couples, because there were women who were feeling so guilty and stressed out that they didn't want to have sex and they didn't want to engage in sexual activity, and they were still feeling so worn out and tired and focused on the baby after 2 months, and they thought there was something wrong with them. And just understanding that that's a normal, natural part of the postpartum experience, it gives them so much space to like just that sense of breathing and like, okay, I'm normal, this is okay, I don't have to be worried about, there's nothing wrong with me or with my marriage or with my relationship.
And when you talk about that postpartum period, so what comes to my mind is like what we know as postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression. So are you speaking specifically about women who are navigating that challenge, or are you speaking about like all women?
No, it's all women in general. Postpartum anxiety and depression add another layer of, of challenge of things to address when we're talking about the postpartum period. But in general, all women and men as well experience a lot of emotional changes and a lot of emotional upheaval in the weeks following a birth. It's a huge life change, and we don't recognize it as much. In a lot of the developed world, there isn't even an extended maternity leave. It's kind of expected, like this expectation to get back to ourselves, to return to what was. And part of what I think is groundbreaking in my approach in the book is that I talk about we're not trying to return to ourselves in the sense that we expect. Even I'm just going to talk about like in terms of our body and body image. We're not, right? There's like these pictures of Kate Middleton, and she's amazing, and everyone's body responds differently to childbirth. But when you see these pictures of someone leaving the hospital after giving birth, looking so beautiful and glamorous, it creates this cultural expectation that like, okay, you have a baby, and then you forget that whole thing happened. You just have the baby. But in reality, it changes us on so many levels. So what I encourage couples to do is, instead of focusing on getting back to how it was, also in terms of our sexuality, not just the goal isn't to return to the same sex life you had before, but to use these changes and these growth experiences that we're going through having a baby to grow and to have an even better sex life, and to explore what we want to do differently now that we've grown and changed. So I think that's also like a mindset shift that is really helpful for people in postpartum.
Okay, so now I want to ask you a question, because like now you're using the word sex life. The title of the book is Sexuality After Childbirth. So what's the difference between sex and sexuality? And then there's also a word people use, intimacy. Is there how do you define the difference between the words? Help like listeners.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and people use them synonymously. And I really try and make the distinction, because they are different. They're interconnected. There's a lot of, it's like a Venn diagram. So they can all meet in a certain place, but they all are also different and stand on their own. Okay. So intimacy is intimacy. There can be emotional intimacy. There can be physical intimacy. There can also be sexual intimacy, but sex isn't necessarily intimate. Intimacy is a relational experience with two people when you really are being able to be vulnerable and open and connected with one another. So I can have like this, I think, is a very intimate conversation that we're having, right? And you even called the title of this series like Intimate Conversations, and it's not any sort of physical intimacy or sexual intimacy, even though we are talking about sexuality. So we all know physical intimacy with our best friends, or with maybe family members, or with our children. We can have intimate relationships. There's also physical intimacy, which again can be vulnerable, a way of touching each other or being with each other physically, but it's not sexual, right? So snuggling with our kid during bedtime, or giving our best friend a hug, or even being physically intimate with ourselves. If you put on hand cream and really like enjoy the sensation and take time to appreciate that, is being physically intimate with yourself, but not necessarily sexually intimate. And then sexual intimacy is sex with those intimate aspects present. There can also be very non-intimate sex. So
I get that.
Okay, so so that was intimacy. I kind of like dove into that. And sex relates to the actual sexual activity. So it's activity done to increase or within the framework of sexual arousal. It doesn't necessarily include genitals, but it can. And sexuality is a much broader term, which includes many, many topics. And that's why I love being a sexuality educator, because I get to talk about the intersection of all of these things. So it's like body image and relationship skills, setting boundaries, sexual activity as well, birth control, mental health ties into this a lot. There are a ton of topics that fall into the category of sexuality. And it really, I feel, and maybe I'm biased because this is my field. You'll say the same about money, I'm sure. But sexuality is like, I feel like it really is the root. It's at the core of our being as humans. It's like it's our life force. And really, when we connect to our sexuality, it expresses itself in so many ways. But it's not just about our sex life.
Right. Okay. So I have a curious question, because you said money, and this is what you do, right? How did you even choose this as your field? How did you have this interest that you decided somewhere along the way that you were going to become a sexuality educator? Nobody grows up, they want to be doctors and nurses and, I don't know, pilots and things like that. So how did you decide that this is what you're being called to do?
It's such a good question. I'm actually trying to formulate a good answer, like a succinct answer. It really was something that developed after I got married, and I started learning for myself more and more about sexuality. And I realized that there was so much information out there. So I started learning a lot of information, but it was still just on the level of knowledge, just informational. And then as I grew, I grew professionally as well. And I started attending training programs and courses. And I realized how much it wasn't just knowing this stuff, but it was learning how to integrate it into your life and to actually do the processing and the emotional work and the mindset work and all of a full package, not just reading the books, but learning how to actually implement it. And I just saw how it changed my life so much. And I was like, I want to be able to pass this gift on.
Amazing.
So I stuck with it.
So there's misconception, and we could probably talk about this for 2 hours or 3 hours, but can you just give us some examples of some of the misconception, and when men, when they have misconceived notions, is that the way to say it? Using the word conception there, I guess so, right? When there is misunderstanding, misconception, they're misinformed. You can give us a couple of examples, but also what happens? How does that affect them? How does that impact their lives, their relationship with each other? What's the trickle down effect on the family, the way they show up in the workplace? What's the impact of that?
There are a lot of elements to that question. So I'll say in even just the most simple physical ways, right? When people don't know how their body works, it's very hard for them to be able to connect with it and to experience pleasure with it with another person. So for example, if a couple doesn't know that many or most women reach orgasm and extreme heights of pleasure through stimulation to the clitoris, they could be having a lot of sex, and the woman can be very frustrated that she never reaches orgasm. Okay, so that's just one piece of misinformation that can totally change the whole trajectory of their intimate sexual life. Or for example, if people don't have information about birth control, they might not know that the birth control they're taking is affecting their emotional state, right? There are a lot of women who experience depression or anxiety from certain kinds of birth control, and they might not make that connection if they don't know. Or this book I mentioned twice because it's such a popular misconception that breastfeeding is not synonymous with birth control. There are women who don't ovulate when they breastfeed, but you can't count on it unless you've actually learned how to notice that in your own body. So I know women who got pregnant very quickly after they gave birth because they did not know that they weren't actually protected. So
worked for me. That's all I can say.
Yeah, so everyone has different experiences, and it could be one. I mean, there are women who they don't ovulate after their first or second, but after another one, they get the period very quickly. And you can also whatever, I won't go into all the details, but just knowing the basic information can have a very big impact on your life. And not knowing, there's the not knowing, there's also not connecting. So it could be that we know in our mind that sex is really important for marriage and it should be something to enjoy and to do together. But when someone, and I'll bring an example of a woman now because we're women and this group is for women. Okay, so when a woman is very postpartum and is having hormonal swings, is very maybe sleep deprived, stressed from all of the lifestyle changes that are going on, and she also has this pressure on the back of her head, I should be having more sex because my partner expects it or wants it, or this is what a good woman does. That takes all of the desire out of the equation, right? It's like, I remember when we worked together, you would tell me a lot of times, and I was like, this isn't fair, you're using my work against me. But you would say, like, when you feel like you need to be making money, how does that make you feel? What would you tell your client who felt like she needed to be having sex, but she didn't want to be having sex? Right. So like, even that part is when you need to be doing something, you feel like you need it, but you don't really want to, you end up creating just avoidant patterns. And when we're talking about someone's marriage or primary relationship, creating avoidant patterns is really something that's not pleasant. I give the extreme example of a couple I knew once who for years, the woman would not sit next to her husband on the couch. She had her recliner and that was where she sat at the end of the day. And in working with someone my colleague worked with, in working with her, it came up that she didn't sit next to him on the couch because she was worried about what that would lead to. She said, if we sit together on the couch and we snuggle, who knows, I might end up having to have sex and I don't want to have sex. And I see this example with couples in the less extreme manners, but even like they'll say to me, I don't want to kiss my husband goodnight once we're in bed because he might get the wrong idea. And couples end up missing out on so much physical intimacy, not even sexual intimacy, but physical and emotional intimacy because they're trying to avoid this thing, which there's so much just stress and fear around because of those avoidant patterns that are developing. So those are some
and so let me ask you a question. And I had another thing come up in my mind, the stress around money and stress around having sex, which we'll bring back. But since you were talking about snuggling in bed or giving a kiss, so where does that physical touch, that's part of like intimacy or sexuality, right? It's not necessarily the specific act of sex, but it's a way of couples bonding and being together and increasing their couplehood, whatever you call that, partnership, right?
So there are two elements to it. There's one kind of touch, which I call neutral touch. And neutral touch is touch with no like sexual attachments. And when I work with couples, a lot of times with women, a lot of times I say is we have to bring back like neutral touch is something that disappears in long-term relationships. Is patting your partner's shoulder when you're passing through them in the living room, or holding hands when you're walking together, or just touching affectionately throughout the day, like randomly for no reason. And research shows that when couples are together for longer periods of time, neutral touch a lot of times disappears. And then the only area where touch is really experienced is in their sexual relationship. And then what happens, the equation that happens is like every kind of touch equals sex, right? So kissing could be neutral touch. It could just be like a kiss when your partner walks in the door or before you guys go to work, before you separate, or when you come home. Those are like important rituals, are separating rituals and reuniting rituals. And neutral touch is great for that because physical touch has a very meaningful effect on our body, on our hormones, on our regulation. So it's really important to have neutral touch. It's a really, really basic human need is touch. And then it can also be sexual touch, but not necessarily needing to lead anywhere. Like a lot of times, another thing we do when we work together is expanding what it means to be sexual or to have sex. And what I tell couples is you don't always have to have intercourse, because that's something people like in their mind is like this big thing, like something you have to check off your checklist. But if we reframe what happens, as I like using the rule, pleasure is the measure. Okay, so if you're enjoying it, if you're having pleasure, that's what's important. We don't need to check anything off a checklist. So if you're enjoying kissing and that feels sexual to you and you're enjoying it, that can also be enough. And you're at least introducing some sort of sexual element or sexual activity into your life. And when you do, like we know, right, with business also, when you're having fun, when you're enjoying yourself, when you're experiencing pleasure, it just brings more and more and more abundance of pleasure into your life and into that area specifically.
Right. Okay. So let's talk. We were going to talk anyway about some of the overlapping areas between money and sex or sexuality. And so I'm going to go back to your example, right? And like that hustling to have to make money, and that feeling that like you have to find it, you have to grab it, you have to like, there's this like very graspy energy.
Scarcity, yeah.
And comes from scarcity. So when I was reading your book, and you quoted in your book, the book that was written by Emily Nagoski, Come As You Are, and she gives this example, which Yonina quotes in her book, about brakes and accelerators, right? Things that if you're, that will break your arousal, and things that will accelerate your arousal, right? Or your desire.
Yeah.
You can talk about it. Anyway, that example I thought was so useful also for business, because, or making money, because when you're trying to hustle for money, I think that's also a break, right? Because when you're trying to chase after something, well, either you're going to get it and then it's going to disappear quickly, or it's just not going to come because there's so much angst and stress around it that it just is going to continue the scarcity, and you're not going to allow it to come in, and come into your life, to come into your business, for it to stay. Right. I also talk about the capacity to have more, which we can also talk about in terms of pleasure, right? We can increase our capacity to have more. And so that, being more calm, being more receptive, right? Being in a place of receiving pleasure, receiving money, in a very open, expansive, flowing way, will act as an accelerator to receiving money. So I kind of like that example, and like to bring it over to business, to money. Yeah.
So that's
go ahead.
It's a really interesting connection. The dual control model, like what in research is called the dual control model of sexual desire. And it really does work in general. I feel like in the world, there's always those, the giving and taking energies. So, but here specifically, they're talking about like what's stopping you, what's blocking you, and what's opening and allowing.
Right.
And I feel like I when I was thinking about our talk today, I wanted to invite people who are watching to do an exercise, and to write down what.
Nobody's on right now, so it's okay.
Okay.
We'll just leave
well,
it
whoever's watching, when you watch this recording, take out a paper and pen, and to write down like 5 beliefs you have about money. And then to change, instead of the word money, to write the word sex or sexuality, and see if they line up. Because a lot of times people, and you talk a lot about also our family story and our cultural, inheritance. And a lot of times money and sex have the same story. They're both resources of power. And when women step into their power, those are 2 areas which are very, very intertwined.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to like let that like marinate within
Yeah,
me
I'll
a
send you
little bit.
some. I'll send you some some information on it.
Okay.
It's really interesting, and like historically, those are also two areas where women were not either encouraged or allowed to have power.
Right.
Even though sexuality was something that women always used to kind of try and gain power, but they weren't autonomous over that power. They weren't really free to experience their pleasure for their own self.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So so that's something that we now have to learn how to do, and because it's not something that we necessarily
We're taught.
inherited, yeah, through in our DNA.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Even when you talk about it, in terms of DNA, because I also have beliefs that some of the way we handle money and maybe
Yeah,
financial trauma, scarcity, like that can be, I don't know, through epigenetics. I don't really understand that
yeah,
field
yeah,
very much, but it can be embedded in our DNA. But when
for
I think about
sure.
like money flows to me easily, like, sex flows to me easily, would you use sex or intimacy or pleasure? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know,
Well,
what will
whatever
you,
word,
right,
yeah.
right.
Or
Um,
like I enjoy having money, right? I
right.
enjoy making money.
Mhm.
Or all kinds of things, or money is good. Like is do we even view our sexuality as a positive in our life, or is it something that we need to harness and control because we're worried that if we actually enjoy it and let it out of the box and step into our sexual power, like who knows what's going to happen? It can be very scary. Right? It's like also with money, like what happens if I start earning a lot of money? I won't know how to handle it. I won't know what to do with it.
Right.
So like also like very parallel stories sometimes.
Okay. I'm looking forward to what you're going to send me.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So you can send it out. Also, we could. I don't know if you could put like links
yeah,
in
I'll put
comments.
some, I'll
I'll
put
put
some links in the
it.
comments. But what I think is interesting that both money and sex have been taboo subjects for
Mm,
a very, very, very long time, probably since the, I don't know, beginning of humankind or something like that. But certainly in the last, I don't know, maybe since the 70s. So we're already talking about 50 years, like, with the whole, probably started with the feminist movement and with the hippies in the 70s and free love and whatever. And like a lot of doors were like burst open, and things
yeah.
that people didn't talk about, they started talking about. And, we don't have to talk about whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, but we're just living in, this is the 31st of December, 2020. So the last day of
Oh.
2020. So we're living in
Oh my goodness.
2021 now by the time most people will listen to this recording. But right, so we're having a new conversation, and just like women and men are becoming more comfortable talking openly about money, how much they earned, right? Or how much,
Mm-hmm.
and that's also been a very taboo subject, to say that, oh, I earned $10,000 or $100,000, $1,000,000, $10 million.
Yeah.
And for women, at least, to have it be completely neutral, right? Because it can be okay for Jeff Bezos to have $138 billion,
Well,
but
that's come into question.
or Mark Zuckerberg. But when you get very wealthy women who have, multiple millions or billions or something, people start talking about women in ways that they don't necessarily speak about men. And so women shy away from being in the public eye talking
Yeah.
about that. Or even something like debt, right? Which, if we want to make a one-on-one comparison, whether it's not having sexual pleasure, not even knowing what to do, and feeling ashamed. Like people can feel ashamed about their sex life and not want to come to an educator or a therapist to get help because they're very ashamed or embarrassed. And that can be the same thing for people who haven't been managing their money, quote unquote, properly or responsibly, or adulting their money. And there can be a tremendous amount of guilt and
Yeah.
shame and embarrassment, um, because maybe there were misconceptions that you talked about, or misunderstandings, or lack of education, or lack of just feeling comfortable talking about it. And through no fault
Mm-hmm.
on anybody's part, it just is a fact of what happened. And that can all be changed going forward. So there's a lot of
Totally.
overlap. And the more we talk about it and make it and normalize it, like nobody did anything wrong. You're just like in a situation today, and you can go forward and make a difference. Like you said in your book, the only constant is change, right? I
It's
think you said that a
change.
few times,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when we
Yeah.
talk
And
about it,
I connect that to what you're saying, like in terms of the comparisons, like with money and sexuality and having it. So like I give this example when I teach teens and we talk about like sexual activity and also gender bias. And I say like, okay, what is a guy who sleeps with a lot of girls, who has a lot of sex? Are they called, like in slang, when when you're hanging out with your friends and talking about it, you're like a player. It's something that's like, yeah, it's expected, it's cool. A girl who has a lot of sex is usually called much more derogatory terms, right? And again, it's like that power. It's like, do we support, do we encourage them to have power and experience their sexuality? Yeah, and also with the shame, totally. And I say, like, if I didn't go into the field of sexuality, I would probably have gotten into money, because I always like talking about taboo things. I say either money or bathroom. I feel like that's still one very thing that people don't talk about is going to the bathroom and all of the different issues that come up with that. So that's another topic, but it's definitely taboo. And sex is confusing. Money also, I really feel like they're almost one and the same. Like when I say it, I'm interchanging it in my mind, but it's confusing because on the one hand, we see very large like expressions of wealth and even like provocative kind of use, and we see very wealthy people, and everyone kind of aspires to be rich, right? We want to be like rich and famous. Those are like cultural kind of status symbols. And also we see like being sexual is something that people really want. People want to have good sex. People want to experience passion and pleasure. So on the one hand, we do see a lot of these expressions, but then when it actually comes to our lived experience, there's still so much shame and trauma that are passed down that are stopping us from being able to receive and to really believe that we're worthy of them. So it's sometimes when I talk to people, they're like, what do you mean? Our society is super pro-sexual and sex positive. But then when we go a layer deeper and like actually investigate the messaging that we receive, also from our families, but also culturally on a more insidious level, we start noticing the problematic and shameful, like the things that hit our brakes that will stop us from actually being able to experience pleasure and step into our full power sexually.
Right. And anyways, you talked about our society, and people say, oh, what are you talking about? Our society is very open and sexual. So I was sort of thinking, and I was making the connection in my mind between money and sex or sexuality, and thinking about whether it's the Academy Awards, right? So you have like the actors and actresses who are, many of whom are earning a lot of money, and the outfits that the women come in with, very low cut tops, high cut skirts, if they're wearing dresses or whatever, mini skirts. So I think from an external point of view, it looks like we as a society we're very open about our sexuality, right? But that's all external. Like the money is external, the sexuality is external, but nobody really knows what's going on, when you close the bedroom door. And the messages that we have about, to a large extent, about both money and sex comes from the media, like comes from Hollywood. Like, how do we even know what a normal sexual relationship is between a husband and a wife? Books and movies, which, by the way, I think is predominantly a men's domain. We're not going to go down and talk about the patriarchy, because that's not my field of expertise.
But it's so true. Yeah, we see, we get, that's where we learn from. And I say a lot, I say, because our sexuality is such an intimate part of us, it's such a personal and private element, that it's not something, and it shouldn't be something which we parade around and, and present for the world to learn from. But on the other hand, where are and how are we going to learn from it? And this is something about it. And I talk about that a lot with parents, is like, that is one of our roles as parents, is to teach our children our values around sexuality and to give them the information that they need in the container that we want them to receive it in. And that really is integrating our values and our lifestyle and evidence-based, research-based, actual accurate information, so that they can grow and develop and kind of to counteract all of the other messages they're receiving from the world, the harmful ones at least.
Right. Okay, so
But
tell us
did you?
about,
That just made me think.
absolutely.
No, it just made me think. Have you ever considered like creating a course or a program for teaching parents how to raise financially healthy children?
People have contacted me about it like over the years, and they, I have sat and worked with some couples. There are other people who've done that, so that's okay.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. That is a course I would definitely want to take.
Right there. I mean, there are different things. I can maybe drop some links. And certainly in Israel, Rivka Leibovitz, whom you and I both know, has a course for couples, just newlyweds on how to manage their money together. I don't think I'm going to do that course.
Okay.
If somebody else wants to do it, that's
well,
fine.
if anyone here is listening and you want to teach parents how to raise their kids, stepping into their financial power.
Right. There are definitely books out there that are available on Amazon and other places where you can go and you can
I'm gonna Google
how
it.
to educate your kids about money. So tell us about your book, Sexuality After Childbirth. It hasn't been published yet, right? I know you're trying to get it okay on the Amazon
It's in
site.
the middle. No, I do have, there are just some technical problems with Amazon, which we're working out. But in parallel, because I was like, I want to be able to give people a link because I'm starting to promote it. So I created, my husband actually, thank you, Nathaniel. He created a website, which I'll send the link so that people who want to already get their hands on it can do that now. And so a little bit about the book. I had an interesting experience where I wrote it and then edited it, worked a long time with the editor, and then sent it to the graphic artist and didn't read it for a while. And then when she sent it back to me and I reread it for the first time in a couple of months, I was like, this is a really good book. Like, I didn't remember that it really touched upon pretty much every topic. And I was reading it also, and I thought, like, this isn't just for parents postpartum. There are obviously elements which are focused much more on the postpartum experience and like the stages of the body healing and things that, you're experiencing with sleep deprivation and things like that. But it is really, I think, applicable to couples in long-term relationships in general, especially for parents or people who just have juggling a lot of balls. There is so much. The table of contents is also on the website my husband created, so you can see like all the topics that we touch upon. And it's really, I just feel like it's really rich. Like, it really has so much, and it's a great combination between like a holistic approach and science-based facts, very practical, like just exercises and ideas of what to do. And you saw it's like short and easy
very
read.
Actionable.
Yeah,
I read it. It's excellent. Even that concept of neutral touch that you spoke about, I really loved that concept because I hadn't thought about it. And maybe one day we'll talk about why, when couples are in long-term relationships, neutral touch disappears, but we're not going to go into that today. That's actually,
and also like my goal when I was writing it, I kept on thinking of like, if a parent wakes up with their kid in the middle of the night and is feeding them, I want them to be able to read this while they're like doing a night feeding. So like that was like my image of when parents would find the time to read this kind of book. So it's really, that's why it's broken down really easily into short parts. And I think it is a really, really great resource for parents out there and for people in general. I'd love to hear your feedback. Yeah.
Okay, so if there's there are people that are listening, they're live with us. If you have a question, go ahead into the Facebook group and drop a comment, a question, and you will also give us you usually hang out on Instagram, right? Sometimes Instagram, on Facebook, usually Instagram.
Yeah. I'm trying to get back to Facebook. It goes through like cycles, but Instagram and Facebook are the two main places, and I have business pages on both. So you can follow them. It's just my name, Yonina Rubinstein. You can follow on Instagram and on Facebook. And I'm also going to send you, Debbie, when you send out the recording, a gift that I made for people on your list.
Wonderful.
So
Thank you.
you'll be able to
And
get it.
I mentioned at the very beginning, you have the course for teaching healthy sexuality to your
Yeah.
children. Is that a course that you'll be offering again in the near future?
So I have a really great course. Like you said, it's 8 parts and it's called Growing Together. It's for parents who want to raise their children in, like we talked about, like with to learn how to teach them healthy sexuality, because it's something that most of us didn't grow up with, and we don't have the tools or the skills really to know how to do that. So it is running. We're actually just finishing one round next week, and then I'll be opening registration in 2 or 3 weeks. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out. I'll either through Facebook, Instagram, and also send my email address through Debbie. And that is a really great gift to give yourself or a parent who you love in your life.
Beautiful. All right. I don't see any questions in the comment section. So, but if anybody comes back later, listens to the recording and has a question, so they'll be able to.
Yeah, we're always available.
And tag us in the Facebook group if you're there, and we'll come back, and Yonina, of course, can answer any questions, let you know. We'll put the links in so you can run out and get her book and start reading it in little snippets in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day. And I really
reading because you're just breathtaking, so can't put it down. So
congratulations, really, Mazal Tov, on birthing this big baby into the world. And you should continue really helping couples and women and men feeling better about themselves, better in their bodies, better in their sexuality and intimacy. And it's good for people, it's good for couples, it's good for their children and their families and everybody else they come into contact with.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.